Canadians are talking about buying local, east-west energy corridors, eliminating trade barriers in the country. Well, tonight we're going to talk about something that has been linking Canada for decades now. Our guest is something of an online star because of his posts about Canadian history online. He's written now about the Trans-Canada Highway, and he joins us from his home near Edmonton. Craig Baird, nice to see you. The Trans-Canada Highway doesn't even run through your town, so why the fascination with it?
Well, maybe because I was born in Calgary, so it does run through there. But I've always been interested in the Trans-Canada. I mean, I think it's something that doesn't get as much notice as something like the CPR, especially in our history. So I want to look at that construction of something that has really shaped Canada and been a part of our nation. I mean, Terry Fox ran it, Rick Hansen was on it, and every single person probably has driven on it at least once in their life.
There's some fascinating little bits of trivia in the book. Like in 1908, there were only 37 registered vehicles in the province of New Brunswick. And there was a time that you couldn't drive from Halifax to Vancouver without going through the U.S. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, in 1912, when the first two people actually drove across Canada, they didn't drive in the United States, but what they had to do was actually drive on the railroad tracks and through Lake Superior actually put the vehicle onto a ship and transport it to Port Arthur, which is now Thunder Bay. So yeah, there was definitely a time where we weren't able to just drive across the country. And in fact, the first person to drive across the country, only driving and only in Canada, that didn't happen until just after the Second World War.
Wow, not all that long ago. You tell the story of a British travel writer who chronicled his journey in the car on the roads of the Maritimes. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it was actually two guys. It was Jack Haney and Tom Wilby who decided to drive across the country. And they actually, they didn't like each other. They were very much not friends, and they drove across the country. It took them 51 or 52 days to go from Halifax all the way to Vancouver. And again, they actually had to drive on the railroad tracks in some places. There's actually one part in the book where I talk about how they were on the railroad tracks at night, and they were kind of hanging over with lanterns to be able to see what they were doing while hoping that a train wasn't going to come around the corner, because they were in British Columbia and there really wasn't very many places to go once that train came around the corner. But luckily they made it all the way to Victoria.
You write New Brunswick was one of the first provinces to sign on the idea of a Trans-Canada Highway. How did the plan come together? Was there consensus immediately among the provinces?
Well, I think there was a consensus that there had to be some sort of national highway because the United States was starting to move forward with its interstate highways. And there wasn't really something to kind of connect all of Canada. And a lot of people were starting to use automobiles much more. So there was, in 1949, the federal government came forward and said, we're going to build the Trans-Canada Highway. We're going to split the cost 50-50 between the provinces and the federal government. And then they told the provinces they had to choose the routes, which I can't imagine that really happening now because we can barely agree on a lot of things. But to be able to choose the routes in each province, and in some places in the east, it wasn't really a big deal. But in the west, where you had numerous cities like Edmonton wanting the Trans-Canada, it took a while to choose those routes.
Yeah, of course, there's that secondary highway through the prairies called the Yellowhead, which runs north Saskatoon into your town, which is an important one. The provinces, were they responsible to build the segment within the province? You talked about mapping out the route.
Yeah, so they had to build within their province, and so the federal government did come forward and say we will pay 50%. But as time went on, the original deadline was about 1957, and Saskatchewan was really the only province that was able to meet that deadline, just because of how easy it was to build across. No other province was able to meet that deadline, and the federal government then said we'll pay 90% of the cost for the 10% most difficult portions in your province in order to get this done. And even in places like Newfoundland, they didn't get it completed until 1965, and the federal government paid the majority of the cost of building that highway. So in the picture of John Diefenbaker, where he's stamping down the asphalt at the Rogers Pass in British Columbia in 1962, there were several provinces that were still building their portions of the highway, including Nova Scotia.
So as you researched this book, what did you learn about Canadians' feelings about the Trans-Canada?
Well, I learned that Canadians really did want some sort of highway across the country, and they really wanted it close to the United States because they wanted to be able to have a lot of that American traffic come up from the United States and go onto the highway. And that was when you really started to see things appearing like the Wawa Goose and other roadside attractions. So it really did fundamentally change Canada and how we traveled around the country. And it was important to get this highway built because we were approaching 1967 and the centennial year. And so you had a lot of people who used this highway to, say, go to Expo 67 or go to Ottawa for the centennial birthday. So people did see this as an important thing to form our national identity and really kind of bring Canadians together coast to coast with a highway that stretched coast to coast.
And what about feelings today? Are we nostalgic about it, or is it just another piece of infrastructure?
I think for most people, it's just another piece of infrastructure. They don't really look at it as anything that's part of our Canadiana, but it really is. The Tragically Hip did tours across Canada on the Trans-Canada Highway. You have Terry Fox, you have Rick Hansen, you have all of these parts of our heritage and our culture tied to the Trans-Canada Highway. But because it's just always there, it's something that we all drive at least maybe once a year or once a day for some people. Yeah. We just don't think about it, and it's just kind of in the background. But it really has a very important role in our history.
Craig, no doubt you started writing this before the current trade war sparked this east-west strengthening of ties, or the desire for it anyway. Does the Trans-Canada Highway offer any lessons for us today?
I think it shows that, if we work together, we can build something that's amazing, that stretches across the country, because all of the provinces had to work together. They had to say, this is where it's going to enter our province because this is where it's leaving your province. And we had to find a way to make it so that it was the most efficient way to get across the country. And the provinces had to work together with the federal government to make that happen. And so I really think it does show that Canada can achieve quite amazing things when the provinces and the federal government all work together as one.
Craig Baird, the host of the Canadian History Podcast. You can find him online, places like X, and now added author to that long list. We appreciate you coming on. I understand you're going to make your way to the Maritimes this summer, or try to.
I am. I'm going to be driving around the country, seeing historical sites, and making my way all the way to the Atlantic coast.
Okay, and maybe we can encourage you to drop in while you're here. Thanks a lot. We appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me.
We'll take a break. We'll be back with much more of your local news after this.